What is up, all you real estate loving individuals? This is episode number 10 of the Real Estate Take podcast with your host, Wendell Butler. That's me. This is your go-to podcast with tons of information regarding the current real estate market, where we get various real estate professionals' current take on different areas of real estate. For today's guest, we have Zachary Gray. Zachary Gray grew up in Northborough, Massachusetts. After battling through family financial problems at a young age, such as his parents filing for bankruptcy and losing their house when he was in high school, Zachary didn't back down. Now he owns 34 units within 18 months of getting started in real estate. Additionally, he has also built a profitable gym called Gray's Anatomy. His goal for this year is to hit 40 units total, and to do this, he has been attending real estate meetups, partnering with other local investors, and leveraging his current relationships at his gym to acquire more properties. There's a lot more details that support this story, and I'm sure Zach can go into it more for us, so let's bring him in. How you doing, Zach?
Doing good, Wendell. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I appreciate you taking the time out to include me in this opportunity, and I think kind of attested to some of the background that I've gone through in my life that kind of helped me get started. I think probably where it makes the most sense to get started is just talking a little bit about what prompted me to get into real estate, as well as what has gone on over the last couple of years. I know there's been a lot of moving and shaking for a lot of people, and so myself included. And so I'm happy to just kind of share my experience with you guys and elaborate a little more on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're so happy to have you on. I met you at like a real estate meetup about, I think like almost a year and a half ago now, but you went from literally asking me how to like house hack to now you own like 3 times more units than me. Like, it's crazy how fast you can fly in real estate if you just put your mind to it and start freaking just putting your foot down and pushing the pedal down and moving. And you are just the epitome of that hard work and what the outcome can be with it. So let's just hop into like your quick backstory. I know I touched on some things, but we just want to get to know you, who you are, where you kind of came from, and yeah, like what got you into real estate investing. Why did you choose that path based on what you went through in your life so far?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the kind words. And just kind of getting into my background. So growing up, I lived in a town in Massachusetts called Marlborough. I lived there for the first 10 years of my life. My dad was a single income household provider. At the time, he was basically bringing home about $400 or $500 a week. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom. Family was on food stamps, fair amount of subsidy. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment that my grandfather owned that we were probably getting a pretty decent discount on. Yeah. From there, one of the questions that I had asked was one time I saw my mom putting the money together to pay my grandfather for the house. And the question that I asked was at the young age was, well, what is this money for? My mom said, this is to pay rent for, and I said, oh, for our house. And I said, and she's like, well, yeah, but it's not really our house. And I was like, well, yeah, it is. Well, we live here. And she said, no, she said, Grampy owns the house, but we have to pay him to live here. And I said, okay, so we pay Grampy. And then she's like, well, it's not that simple because Grampy has to pay the bank. And I was like, okay. And I was like, but she was like, but Grampy pays the bank less than what we pay him. And I was like, so at that moment, I said to my mom, I was like, so when can we be like Grampy? And she was like, well, it's not that easy. And I was like, it sounds pretty easy. And so this is me. This is probably 7, 8, 9-year-old me at the time. And this is the first time that it kind of dawned on me how just the idea of real estate and what that entailed. Fast forward probably about 10 years or so, I was a senior in high school. The whole time growing up, my parents basically said, put in the effort academically, persevere, do what's necessary in order to prosper. And you'll end up in a position in which collegiately you'll be able to seize the opportunities that are available to you. I ended up applying. I ended up doing that. I graduated toward the top quarter of my class, closer to the top 10%, got into all the colleges that I applied to. And at that time, basically about a couple weeks before I was set to graduate, I talked to my parents about committing to a college. And when talking about financials and the logistics of it, my parents basically said, yeah, we don't have any money to give you to be able to go to college. And this was news to me because my parents the whole time had said, like, if you put your effort in academically, it'll end up getting taken care of. And at this time, I was basically notified that my parents did not have the financial literacy skills to be able to navigate some of the hardships that existed in the early 2000s. Essentially, my parents made some pretty poor moves, some of them including cashing out their 401k and paying taxes on that, paying penalties on that. My parents ended up buying a house in which they took a HELOC against it when the market went up in closer to 2008. And then the HELOC had an adjustable rate mortgage, which resulted in them not being able to make, and they used the money to be able to renovate the the house. When they renovated the house, they had the adjustable rate on the HELOC, and it made it so that we could no longer afford the principal payments on the house. And essentially, very quickly, you became extremely house poor. And at that time, my parents basically conveyed to me that we were going to have to file for bankruptcy. So here I am, an 18-year-old kid, back up against the wall, basically saying, I got a real tough decision to make here as to what I want to make of myself and what I want to do moving forward. And at that time, I had gotten into so I wanted to go to school for business. That was kind of my primary goal was to go to school for business. And I had gotten into some prominent business schools like Babson, Bentley, Bryant, and I had also gotten into the UMass Honors Business Program. And what I ended up doing is I was sort of in a position where after having watched what my parents had gone through, I had personally realized that taking on debt that would only hold me back.
Yep.
And that it would really mitigate my ability to prosper in my own life. So after having that realization, one of the things that I considered was the idea of going to a state university, commuting to school. So I saved money on paying housing and being able to minimize the burden that I would incur in order to acquire a collegiate degree. I was the first person in my family to go to college. I ended up committing to Worcester State in their honors program for business. And then my number one goal at that time was to not take on any debt in order to go to school. The second that I graduated high school in May, I began working 70 hours a week in May all the way through September as a means to try to save and consolidate money to be able to pay for my first semester of school. And so at the time, I walked in the first week of my first semester to the financial aid office at the college and slapped a big fat check on the counter and felt like the biggest boss of my life.
You're like, here we go, baby.
Yep, to pay for my first semester of college. And it was one of those moments where like it felt really good at the time. And what I realize now is I wish that I actually had that money back.
Yeah, right.
But at the end of the day, I think that it taught me a lot about how to bear down and be able to endure really tough circumstances, how to budget, how to plan, and how to put a model together to be able to afford something that was really important to me. And I think those are things that I carried with me, with myself for the remainder of, my life moving forward thus far. And so at that time, I continued to work full time throughout the remainder of my freshman year. And when I got to the tail end of my freshman year, I basically was staring down the barrel of having to do this all over again.
Yeah.
And at that time, I was like, there has got to be a better way, an easier way to do this. And at that time, that's kind of where I came across the idea of enlisting in the military and getting school for free. And one of the things for me is I was not concerned about the physical component of the military in any capacity. I felt that was going to be one of the easiest things to handle. That was about the time in which I realized that the idea of the military was possible as a means to help pay for college so that I didn't have to work 70 hours a week and then work 40 hours a week while I was going to school full time during the year. At that time, I began kind of digging into what that would entail. And really the physical part of it didn't really concern me in any capacity because I worked out with regularity and it was something I was passionate about. My main concern was I didn't want to have to go somewhere, get deployed, and get blown up. For me, one of the primary drivers was sitting down with the recruiter, figuring out, hey, take the academic test, figure out how to move forward from there. Long story short is I ended up enlisting in the military. I viewed it as strictly transactional. I said, I'm going to be in for 6 years. I'm going to be out after the end of 6 years. This is going to be something that I'm going to incur for the next 3 years while I finish my program. Once I get done, I'm going to have 3 years of reserve time to be able to, that I'm going to have to endure upon the beginning of my professional career. And this is what it's going to take in order for me to not have to take on the debt. So that will saddle me and hold me back to be able to make the moves that I wanted to be able to make. And at this time, I had already had in my head that I wanted to be involved in some capacity in real estate. I had taken a real estate investing course in high school remotely. That was something that my high school offered, which was kind of weird. I also took a real estate investing course in college at Worcester State, and I began to learn a little bit about the logistics of it. I don't know at that time how much of it carried over. I just know that it was something that I continuously sustained a general level of interest in. And to give a little bit of background surrounding the kind of the bridge from freshman year to graduating, long story short is I was essentially getting paid $14,000 a year to go to school in addition to my expenses being covered. And this was done through me receiving my financial aid as a form of reimbursement. Habitually, that money would go toward housing, but I didn't live on campus. So I ended up getting basically my financial aid reimbursed annually at about $14,000 a year. So over the course of the remaining 3 years, I had basically made about $42,000. I continued to work full time to a lesser degree. At the time, had gotten certified upon returning from basic training. I got certified to be a personal trainer, and I actually began training personal training clients that I had acquired and lead generated through Craigslist at the time. And I was doing that out of my parents' basement in where I was living, commuting to school. If that tells you a little bit about just kind of motor wise where I lie, I'm willing to do anything to make things work. And the reason that I ended up getting into personal training is I was saying to myself, like, I cannot keep slinging coffees at Dunkin' Donuts for $10 an hour. There's got to be a more feasible way for me to generate more money per hour. I'm just worth more than this. It's just too hard to work and do this. So like I said, I ended up kind of generating my own kind of personal training business. I was doing like 25 sessions a week for like $25 an hour cash while I was in school. I was using that money to help pay my parents some rent and then pay for my own expenses, pay for my school supplies, so on and so forth. And I was taking the money from the school that they were giving me in the form of reimbursement and then putting that aside for sort of a future security blanket. And when I graduated, I had a degree in finance. And then I got to a point where I basically said, I'm going to apply. I was at kind of a crossroads of, do I want to keep doing this fitness thing or do I want to apply for finance oriented jobs? And so I got a degree in finance and I applied for a bunch of finance jobs, and I also applied for a bunch of training jobs. And I got an offer at, to me, what was the premier training facility on the East Coast, which is a really luxurious gym called Equinox. And I began personal training there. And I basically said to myself, I gave myself an ultimatum. I said, I know if I took a finance job, I'm going to probably have to put in 50 to 60 hours a week. I'm probably going to make about 60K. At Equinox, I looked at it and I said, I'm going to give myself a year. And what I'm going to do, and the thing is that I saw a path that in a year, I could get myself up to earning close to or north of six figures based off their revenue share model for training.
Yep.
I based at the 9-month marker, I had reached my goal, which was I had surpassed making six figures at that 9-month mark. And I was putting in 60-hour weeks, no doubt, for 9 months straight. I know that for 5 of those months, I didn't take a day off.
Yeah.
Now, with that having been said, at that time, I think that I developed a sense of financial security, began bolstering my savings account, began investing money in the stock market. And it hadn't occurred to me to re-engage the possibility of dabbling into real estate yet. I think that I was always interested in buying a property for myself to live in because I was sick of forfeiting money for rent. Also, whole separate story that we don't need to get into, but in terms of rent, I actually lived in a 3-bedroom in Waltham, which was about 10 minutes from where I was working in Chestnut Hill. And the apartment was rented for $1,650 outright for the 3 beds. And I actually ended up renting both the beds for $800 a room. So I was actually paying $50 a rent, $50 a month for rent in that 3rd bedroom. So essentially, without even knowing it at the time, I had actually house hack arbitraged an apartment where I was paying $50 a month to live. And it was just simply coming off of like me being witty and sort of strategic. And then what ended up happening from there is I ended up putting some money aside. And then this is kind of where, after a couple years, at the time I was probably 25 or 26. I put 25. I had taken some money, my girlfriend at the time, and we bought our first townhouse. And I bought a townhouse in a town called Maynard, which is surrounded by a bunch of other towns that are kind of highly valued real estate areas: Sudbury, Lincoln, Concord, Lexington, that kind of demographic. And we bought the townhouse for $240,000, and we had put 10% down on the house. At the time, my goal was to try to mitigate the cost of our mortgage payment per month to the lowest possible denomination that we could. And it had not even occurred to me the idea of doing multifamily as a means of mitigating the cost of that. One of the things that I was looking for was a value add component. And there was a way for me to add a 3rd bedroom to that unit that was originally a 2-bed. And so what I ended up doing was I ended up buying that townhouse. We lived there for 2 years. And that basically at the 2-year marker is where we hit COVID. And I think COVID kind of threw me for a loop in a lot of ways for obvious reasons. There was a lot that got shaken up with the fitness industry, caused a lot of turmoil in that sector for me and my job. And I was kind of unclear as to what would be the case for me moving forward. That was the inflection point for me, where I said, I got to find a way to mitigate at the time what was my biggest expense. And that was my monthly mortgage. entertaining the idea of real estate investing as a means of reducing my financial burden. And having come across Bigger Pockets, that is sort of what really opened the whole can of worms. I'm sure it has for all of us on just how much you can actually accomplish in this industry. I think that kind of gives a pretty comprehensive understanding of my background, what I had gone through, how I got to the point in which I owned my first piece of real estate, and in general, what prompted my interest.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good story because it's good to hear that from like the beginning to the end of, I'm sure there's more stuff involved in that, but it's good for people to hear that and understand like where you came from, what you had to go through, and kind of your mindset going through it in regards to real estate, even as a person as a whole. Just the fact that you got to have drive, and you got to have a goal, you got to have like resiliency and ambition to continue to keep moving forward. And you strategically, like without even knowing too, like set yourself up for better situations within real estate investing too. Like even when you were like subleasing your apartment, you're like, this is kind of cool. It's kind of smart. Because like the thing about real estate too, it's a lot of just common sense. And like you might be doing real estate investing without even knowing it. And you're like, wait a minute, now I'm doing what I could do at a bigger, larger space. Where that becomes more real estate investing. So you're basically house hacking before you even started house hacking, or arbitraging before it was even a thing. And that's what's cool. It's cool how like people find avenues and find ways to get into real estate. And I think that's just a really good story of how you showed your resiliency and got into it. Now, looking back through that, like when you bought your first town home and stuff too, was there anything you would have done differently leading up to your first purchase? Like, would you have, like, what's some things you might have done differently?
I think there's a lot of things that I would have done differently. Coming out of, so really what allowed for me to take that training position and take that risk of basically starting at making $400 or $500 a week to then getting to the point where I was making six figures in the first year of having worked there was the fact that I had this big security blanket in my savings account from the time and the money that I had stockpiled away from the time in which I was in school that I got as a reimbursement from the military. So the time in which I graduated, I had $40K in my account sitting idle as basically a security blanket. Yeah. And to get back to your question about what I would have done differently, it's what I would have done differently had I known then what I know now. I would have absolutely bought a house. I would have bought a 3-family or a 4-family. Going back to had I known what I know now, I would have bought a 3-family or a 4-family while I was in school in Worcester. I would have rented it out to a whole bunch of people that I went to school with. I would have cash flowed the property. I would have then got to a point where I would have started. Then I would have taken the money that I had and made an equity. I would have rolled it into buying something that I would have lived in while I was working in Chestnut Hill. And then I would have kind of moved from there. Unfortunately, that's not what ended up happening. But in terms of I probably would have bought sooner is probably my number one thing that I look back and say that I just wish I bought sooner. Mm-hmm. And I wish that I thought about buying sooner. And especially because I had the means to be able to do it. And I think that part of that was that I was so concerned with building up a security blanket. And that was largely tied to the fact of the financial hardships that I had seen my parents go through. So I think that's one of the things that potentially helped me, but also hamstrung me and held me back in the early stages. Townhouse, and we kind of went through that whole COVID bit. That's what really propelled me to try to acquire my first multi. And one of the challenges that I was dealing with at the time was, logistically thinking about it, I wasn't aware of what lending options were available to me. I wasn't aware of what hard money entailed or any of the rules or the logistics surrounding being qualified. Yep. And I had just basically what I had to do is I had to leave my employer who I was working for, where I was making six figures training. And what I ended up doing is I bought a fair amount of equipment. I threw it in the back of a Honda CRV. I was driving around house to house to house to all my clients, training for cash. And I was stockpiling that money away during COVID. I was just working my ass off, not spending money on anything, trying to do everything and anything possible to make more money. And during that time, I was making money hand over fist, but I couldn't get qualified because I hadn't had 2 years of business experience and I had just recently lost my job. So I was having a real tough time qualifying for my first property. And what I ended up doing is I actually ended up going on the Bigger Pockets forum and posting in the community forums to ask for recommendations to work with portfolio lenders, because that's just something I had heard about on the Bigger Pockets podcast in regards to using a non-conventional form of financing as a means to help me get pre-approved for a multifamily property.
Yep.
And the contingencies that existed at that time were that I had to sell my townhouse in order to roll the money into the down payment for the 2-family that I would be purchasing. And I had to put 20% down on that original 2-family. So that's what I ended up doing. I ended up selling the townhouse and then rolling the money into my first 2-family. And it was at about that time, I was scared to death going into my first property. I had no idea how to draw up a lease contract. I had no idea how to collect the money. I had no procedures in place. And I'm just, at this time, I'm like a 27, 28-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And I'm renting to people that are older than me. So at that time, I kind of got deep into the trenches. I just very rapidly started to learn what the cost of renovations entailed, what kind of work had to be done in order to make the units cosmetically habitable. I think kind of from there, it was about the time in which I began the idea of starting to attend meetups to further expand my network, to further expand the amount of connections that I had in the real estate sector. And additionally, there were so many questions that I had and I just didn't know who to ask. And I said, one of the things that I thought back to in regards to my time once I got to a point where I had my first Equinox doing personal training was I had built my own personal training business while I was in college, acquiring clients through Craigslist. I show up at this really bougie luxury gym and I thought I was the man.
Yeah.
And I rolled in day one and I was like, I've already done this from the ground up. Coming into a gym where people are going to be gift wrapped with a bow leads to me. It's going to be easy. And I showed up on the first day and I realized I didn't know what I was talking about.
Yeah.
And it's not that I didn't know how to train or I didn't know how to work out in regards to biomechanics, in regards to human anatomy, in regards to injury prevention techniques, in regards to program design, periodization. There's a whole multitude of items that I had really no idea about. And it was at this time that I took a good, long, hard look around the room and I said, I'm the dumbest person in the room. And the thing is, I'm actually okay with that.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. I can look at this one of two ways. I can feel self-conscious about it, or I can view it as an opportunity. I'm around 30 other coaches that have been doing this professionally much, much longer than I have. And I have a lot to be able to extract and learn and grow myself as a coach at that time. And slowly over the time in which I was there, which was 4 years, I slowly became one of the more and more credited coaches in the room. And that was through spending money on going to seminars, doing continuing education in my free time, constantly listening to podcasts, constantly reading material, building a network of experts in the industry. And so I took the same mentality and the same approach and transferred it over into real estate. And I said, who are the experts in the industry? Who are the people that know, who know how to do this in my immediate demographic? Who are the people that are doing what I want to be doing in this demographic? Because if I'm comfortable enough to make myself the dumbest person in the room, again, in this sector, the way that I did in training, it's already panned out for me once before. And what I can do in this environment is I can really make myself vulnerable and I can really put myself in a position to learn from people who know a whole lot more than me. And this kind of brings me back to what you had mentioned in the beginning was you and I had met at a meetup. And actually, ironically, without you having known this, that was my first meetup that I had ever been to anywhere.
Yeah.
I spoke with you and I spoke with two other folks that night. One of them is someone who is now part of our personal network, who is, his name's Andrew Freed. And he's actually been on the Bigger Pockets Real Estate Rookie podcast. And Andrew and I are now partners on a number of deals together throughout these first 2 years. And with that having been said, none of that would have been possible had I not gone to these meetups. And so this is where I want to really segue into meetups as a whole and kind of how it transformed me as a professional, as an investor, on really being able to calm some of the jitters that exist in the early stages and provide you with a sounding board for any and all issues that you're dealing. And how this happened for me is I specifically remember having gone to that first meetup and I was really nervous. Spoke briefly with you and I think we ended up hitting it off fairly early just due to the fact that we were both military guys.
Yeah.
And I vividly remember my first conversation with Andrew and I was so excited to tell him about all this amazing property that I had. And and how I was living in it free and that I had making a couple $100 a month. And
Because this was when you just bought that duplex, right? And you just got it rented out.
Exactly. So I was living in one unit, renting out the other, and I was making up $400 a month. And what I mentioned to Andrew is I was like, this property cash flows like a beat. I was like, I could rent out the unit that I'm in and go buy my next one. I haven't even used my FHA card yet. And so I was kind of talking strategy with him. And when talking with him, he asked me, he's like, well, what's the cash on cash return? At the time, I didn't even know what cash on cash return was.
Andrew's a big cash on cash return guy,
yeah,
which is what you should be. You should be in real estate.
In fairness, to give you some hindsight, the guy who I'm speaking to is the dude who runs the meetup. So this guy runs the meetup. Here I don't know my ass from my elbow. And I'm talking to this guy who runs the meetup and he's asking me what my cash on cash return is on the property. And I'm just like, I don't know, man. I was like, I just knew that I could buy it and the rent's way more than what the mortgage was. And I was like, it seemed like a good deal to me.
Yeah.
And I remember having gone home at the end of the night and I was like, I met some cool people. I took down their phone numbers. I put them in my phone. I stayed in touch. I went to the next month. But the biggest thing is I remember going home from that meetup and saying to myself how much of an idiot I felt like for not knowing what the cash on cash return was on the prop. And at that time, again, this is an opportunity for me to say, oh my God, I just got embarrassed in front of people who probably think I'm stupid and I'm never going to go back there. And this was a waste and I got nothing on it.
Yeah.
And what I did is I went home and I looked up models on how to figure out what my cash on cash return was for the property that I had. And I drew out the model and I got to the end. And what essentially had happened is I had bought a property that had a 3-bedroom and a 2-bedroom unit. And the 3-bedroom unit was able to be turned into a 4-bedroom unit, and the 2-bedroom unit was able to be turned into a 3-bedroom unit. So I was actually able to add a bedroom to both units. And upon renting them out, I got to a point where the property, when underwriting it, was like a 15% cash on cash. And I brought it back to the meetup. The next time I saw Andrew, I went up to him first and I said, I appreciate you for holding me accountable for asking me that question last time about the cash on cash return. And I didn't know the answer. And you probably think I'm stupid. And I said, but the fact of the matter is, I went home, I looked up the information, I underwrote it the way that you wanted me to. And when I underwrote it, it comes out to a 15% cash on cash. And he looked at me like a deer in headlights. And he's like, you found a property, bought it on accident, and generated 15% cash on cash off the MLS. And I was like, yep. And he was like, that's wild.
Yeah. What's it?
So I think the takeaway that he had was he said to me, this guy, he's like, I don't know what this guy's deal is, but the fact that I mentioned one thing to him, he goes home and does all this back end research to figure out the answer to the question that I asked him, tells me all I need to know about what drives this guy and how motivated. So we ended up shooting the shit. And I told him at the second meetup, I said, here's the deal. I said, I just got a HELOC, or I said, I'm looking for a HELOC on my primary residence. I have this property that I have 20% vested in, and it's my primary. And he was like, oh, he's like, you should go to this lender. And he's like, they'll give you 95% LTV on a primary that you live in. And I was like, oh my, I was like, this sounds amazing. Yeah. So I ended up connecting with this lender, getting a home equity line on this property. And this is what sort of trampoline my whole trajectory here is. I took a HELOC on a property and I was sitting idle with the money. And I went to the meetup with Andrew and I said, hey man, I said, I got $93,000 here in a HELOC ready to go. I said, I know there's a lot of people in real estate that are really apprehensive about getting into partnerships prematurely and doing deals together. And I think that part of that is predicated on people want to know the full story on anything that they're putting their money into. And they want to know all the logistics and they want to be in control of the logistics. And they don't know whether they would connect well with the person that they'd be partnering with. And one of the things that I said to Andrew that I think really hit home to him was I said to him, I got $93,000 loaded gun ready to go. I said, if you find a deal, I said, hit me up. I will not waste your time. I will not balk at the opportunity. I said, if you send me a deal and you want to do it, I'll take it seriously. And at this time, my game plan was that I wanted to buy a house hack at real low money down. I was either going to use my FHA with 3% down, or I was going to use my VA loan from the military, which is 0 down. Yep. And so I was trying to maximize how much I could get from a purchasing power standpoint standpoint, and also figure out how could I get myself simultaneously more proximal to where I was working. And so at this time, what I also figured out was that because I acquired the HELOC, but did not use any of the funds before I purchased the house hack, I was able to get maximal leverage financing on the house hack for the VA loan property that I purchased, which was actually an $870,000 3-family in Framingham that I lived in and started house hack. And as soon as I got that property under contract, and as soon as we closed that contract, Andrew had hit me up with an opportunity. I vividly remember I was walking my dog in the woods. It was 6 p.m. on a Friday. Now, with you and I both knowing Andrew all too well, the only person that is calling you with a deal at 6 p.m. on a Friday is Andrew Freed, let me tell you.
Yeah, dude, that's like his favorite time to call. It's 6 p.m. on a Friday when you're like doing something and he's like, hey, so I got this deal. It's like, what?
So he hits me up and he's like, so I got this deal. He's like, it was listed 10 minutes ago on the MLS. He's like, I think we should submit an offer and we need to press this guy to give us a commitment in under 12 hours.
Like, okay.
And I'm like, the funniest thing is every single person would take this phone call and say, you need to pump the brakes, man. We haven't looked at the property. I don't even know how many bedrooms are in this. We don't even know what the condition is like. All these logistical barriers.
Yeah.
I said to the guy, I said, straight up, I said, how many units, how many beds, what's the comp rentals based off of stabilization? We mapped it out. He said, we can buy this thing for $650 and it will gross $8,400 when we stabilize it. I'm like, that sounds pretty good. And he was like, I think we should offer $650, which is the asking price. We should give a 12-hour turnaround and we should make it contingent upon walking the property. And I was like, sounds good. I was like, send it over. I'll sign it. And he was like, are you serious? I was like, I wasn't lying to you, man. I said, hit me up when you find a deal. You found a deal. I said, now it's my job to hold on my word, which is I want to do this. Like, I was like, let's do this together. And so we ended up actually getting an accepted offer on that property. That property ended up appraising for over $700,000. We were able to go. It was our first time going through commercial lending. We ended up being able to get renovation money from the commercial lender to do the full stabilization process of the entire building. We got $50K worth of renovation money. It made the stabilization process seamless. And that was due to the fact that it appraised above what we were purchasing it for.
Yeah.
We were ecstatic that we got a sick deal. We ended up buying that property and stabilizing it in 6 months. And that was about 6 months ago. From that time forward, we're going to be able to refinance that property and cash out pretty much close to about $90K each. And I think we're total all in on this deal for close to like $98K a piece. So I think we pretty much burned a 5-unit commercial and did it in 6 months seamlessly as our first kind of tandem partner property together. And I think that was a great jumping off point to Andrew and I figuring out how we work together, working out who is going to be doing what in regards to the logistics of the management style. At that point, I was fully pot committed on scaling real estate. It was all I did. All I listened to was Bigger Pockets. I probably blew through 500 episodes. I think in 2021 and in 2022, I read close to 20 to 25 books both years.
Oh, yeah.
And so that really magnified and intensified my knowledge basis in the industry in a very expedited period of time. And what I did at that time was I took the deals that I had done so far and I put them on paper the way that we would underwrite a deal. And I mapped out the cash on cash returns. And when I mapped out the returns, I then went into my business, which I ran at the time, which had essentially come to fruition due to all my efforts over the last 2 to 3 years during COVID. And I had a number of clientele that I was working with for 5 to 6 years or so at that time. And during that time, I had developed really kind of long-standing, long-lasting relationships with these people. And these people really trusted me and really confided in me. And so I brought a bunch of my long-standing clients the deals that I was doing in real estate and conveyed the cash on cash returns that I was getting. And I basically said to them, hey, would you be interested if I found a property and brought it to you and gave you a pitch on what kind of return I could provide? And a lot of them were just like, yeah, sure. And a lot of them asked a lot of questions about how the whole thing would work out. And I ended up finding my first property shortly after Andrew and I had closed the 5-unit together. And it was an MLS listed property. It was listed as a 5-bed, 2-bath. I knew that I could convert it into, at the time, at a minimum, a 7-bed, 2-bath. And after having acquired the property, I actually figured out a way to convert it into an 8-bed, 2-bath. So I basically took a house that was priced for having had 5 bedrooms as a 2-fam and then turned it into 8 bedrooms. And this was my first deal that I did with a client. And I mapped out all the logistics surrounding, I put together a renovation budget. I had contractors walk the property with me. I put all the logistics down on paper. And I went to the client and I said, here's the deal, man. I said, if you buy this deal with me, I'll give you a 10% return on your money guaranteed. And I said, if it doesn't come from the property, I'll personally guarantee it. So the money will come out of my pocket. To him, he looks at this and he says, sure, he's getting a 10% return on his money. And I said, on top of that, I said, you're going to be on the loan. We're going to co-own the property. We're each going to have, so the deal is, the way that we're going to work this deal, after your 10% preferred return, I get all excess cash flow on this property. Additionally, any equity increase in the property, you get 50% and I get 50%. So now I own 50% of the property. I get indefinite cash flow for any rent increases that exist over time. And all I have to do is I have to pay him his 10% preferred return and give him 50% of the upside. And now I just got free equity for orchestrating this deal and managing the whole thing. Yeah. And so fast forward, so I purchased this property as a 5-bed, 2-bath. I was able to add 3 bedrooms to the deal. It ended up being an 8-bed, 2-bath. And I promised my client a 10% preferred return. I guaranteed the return regardless of whether the property performed or not. He committed the down payment for the deal. I committed the renovation money largely because he was unsure of my underwriting for the cost of the renovation. So I basically said, in order to avoid concern, I said, I'll cover the renovation money in order to get the property up to performing. And you get your 10% preferred return and you get 50% of the equity increase over the long haul. And for me, I get all excess cash flow indefinitely moving forward, north of the 10% preferred return. And in addition to that, I also get 50% of the equity. And he looked at that and said, absolutely, it's a no-brainer. And
now,
so
when you presented this, did you research how to structure this, or were you kind of just this sounds like something that I would take? Let me just put it in a way that if someone came to me with this deal, I would do it. Or did you see other people doing these deals? How did you come up with this whole setup?
I literally just said, this is what I think would be fair. What do you think about this? I had no idea how to structure it. I had no idea what would be a fair return to give him on his money, guaranteed. I knew that index funds return somewhere between 6 and 8%. So I was like, all right, well, if this guy makes 6 to 8% on an index fund, I got to give him something that's a little bit better than that. So I just said, I'll give you 10%. And I feel like this guy was an older guy. He's closer to retirement age. And I said, yeah, I'm sure this guy would love to make a preferred rate of 10%, which is better than an index fund. And that he gets the collateral of the property and he gets the equity upside as well. And he also gets some tax benefits. And so he was super agreeable to the whole situation. And fast forward, we purchased that property in November and we're now in May. So we're probably only about 6 months into owning that property. And it's one of my highest performing properties, frankly. I pay the guy a 10% return on his money. I get a property management fee of $385 a month, and I still personally cash flow off this property in excess of his 10% return, close to $1,000 a month. And with that having been said, it's I'm paying this guy $962 a month. That's 10% on his money. And here I'm making more money in cash flow off this property than what I'm paying him in a preferred return. So, and that's not including my management fee. So I look at this deal and say, man, that was a home run. Yeah. Kind of a lightning in the bottle situation in which you're able to find a property that is sitting on the MLS that you can add 3 bedrooms to. But ultimately we made it work and the deal made sense. And then I'm now, after having performed a deal with one of my clients, now I go around to all my other clients and I'm like, hey, here's the blueprint model of what I can do for you, because I just did it with this guy. And here he is advocating for he's like, I get my checks in the mail the first of the month. I'm making 10%. I'm getting monthly distributions from Zach. Yeah. And he's like, and I own 50% of the property and I don't have to do any work. He's like, what more could I ask for? And now all my clients are looking at me and they're like, can I get a number, please?
Yeah.
It's
Next,
like the deli counter.
My turn.
It's like the deli counter at the grocery store.
Yeah.
So now I gotta line out the door people that want to lend me money, and it's like, all right, now we're working with something. And so this is the point where this was at about the inflection point in the start of 2023, and at that time I had a total of 12 units, and I was like, all right, like what's a goal? What's a good goal for 2023?
Yeah.
I was like, well, if I house hack a 3-fam and I buy one more, then I could probably get like 6 units. And I'm like, all right. So 6 units. So I'm like, all right, 18 units. And I was like, 18 units sounds good. Let's do 18 units. And within the first month of the year, Andrew hits me up and he's like, hey man, I found a 6 unit in Worcester and it prices out at $125K a door. And I'm like, I know Worcester and I know full well Worcester's $165 a door or more. And now we're pushing at this time, we're now in the spring, we're pushing close to 200 a door, give or take.
Yeah.
It could be 175 to 200 a door. So he hits me up in January and he's like, hey man, I got this property 125 a door in Worcester. Are you in? And I was like, where do I sign? So now I'm going to my deli counter, taking the next ticket, and I'm like, all right, let's take down the 6 unit. So we take down the 6 unit, and I'm like, all right, well, I just hit my goal for the year. And we're in January, so I might need to reevaluate this and think a little bit bigger. And so it was at that point in which I said, fuck it, let's double it.
Yeah.
And I was like, go big or go home. I was like, I got a lot of people that want to give me some money. I was like, let's make this happen. Over the course of January until now, it's been a very, very, very busy couple of months. But overall this year, Andrew and I purchased that 6 unit. Since that time, I've bought a 2 unit, a 3 unit, a 5 unit, and a 6 unit. So ultimately, so far this year, we've acquired a total of 22 units. Yeah. And we're only at 12 going into the year. And so all these deals are partner deals, leveraging my relationships in order to build equity and improve cash flow for myself and my family and provide returns for my clients who are really now vertically integrated in my gym business and my real estate business. And so we're sitting in May at about 34 units, and myself, Andrew, and then 2 other friends in our network are actually in the midst of finalizing a 70-unit syndication with the 4 of us as general partners in New Bedford. And there's not a time in my life 6 months ago where Andrew and I are buying this 5 unit and I got 2 properties under contract, in which I thought 6 months from now I'd be syndicating a 70-unit portfolio and asset management. And what it comes down to is this is just a testament to how much you can learn in a year to a year and a half horizon when you are listening to Bigger Pockets every morning when you drive into work, listening to it every time that you are driving home from work, reading books on the weekends and putting that time in your schedule to be able to read those books, to be able to learn the information that is needed in order for you to ask intelligent questions about the properties that you're dealing with. And then putting these meetups in your calendars and putting time aside to network with other professionals that are in the industry, whether you need networking for contractors or whether you need networking for deal sourcing or whether you need networking for private access to private capital. Ultimately, what it comes down to is you have to allocate the time in your schedule in order to make those things happen in order for you to really propel yourself up this ladder in real estate, because nobody is ever going to come to you and say, hey, here's my best 10 contractors. No one's going to come to you and say, hey, here's all my lending connections. Let me intro you. Yeah. No one's going to come up to you and say, hey, here's $1 million. Why don't you go buy some properties? You have to make these things of the utmost priority in your life in order to really leverage your situation and your skills in order to climb this ladder and create financial freedom for you and your family.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the biggest success is produced by networking, I think. And you prove it through your story. It's basically from just talking to people, meeting people, learning from people, and just telling people what you do and showing people what you do. And you did all that. And because of that, it allowed you to propel yourself much more quick than other people that don't do that. Other people that just try to just do it themselves, keep to themselves, not network, not talk to people, not try to learn from people, not try to be the stupidest person in the room. As long as you keep on trying to put yourself in uncomfortable situations and get out there and meet people, like you're going to push to the next level. It's like a video game. You just try to get to the next level, get more complicated. Once you get comfortable, then you want to make yourself uncomfortable again and just keep going because you're going to build. I don't know if Andrew told you this, but it's crazy how like networking works. So you know that 6 unit that you were talking about on Hammond Street?
Yep.
Guess who the person that brought that to him?
You.
Yeah, because I saw it. I saw it on Facebook, and I wasn't in a position to buy because I just moved to Charlotte. But I
Yep.
saw it on Facebook. I saw the price of it, and then I saw it was like 6 units, and I'm like, why is that priced at that? I was like,
Yeah.
why? I was like, is something wrong with it? And I looked at the pictures. I'm like, it looks fine. Immediately sent it to Andrew. Andrew's like, Andrew was like, I don't like that area, man. I don't know. I'm like, Andrew, just go look at it. Do you see the price of it? Just go look at it. And then like, obviously he called you and he's like, hey, let's buy this shit.
Yeah. And the reason he's hitting me up is because the last time he calls me at 6 p.m. on a Friday and he's like, do you want to submit an offer with a 12-hour turnaround? And I'm like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
And he's like, all right, I'm gonna call up this psycho again. He's like, this guy, he's like a perfect bucket opportunity. Fairness, that 6 unit, that's been that has not been a walk down the yellow brick road.
Yeah, I've heard you had some.
Down.
I mean, it's the area. You've had some tenant problems. I've heard. It's funny how networking comes in full circle. Because like you might meet someone and then you meet another person, then it ends up they all commingle and become like deal makers together, which is cool.
And this is, you're really hitting the nail on the head, Wendell, is like one of the things that I have always felt, and this is in regards to my business as well as in regards to real estate, is in starting to run my own business, I realized that more that you preserve and hoard and extract every ounce of monetary gain out of your work environment, and you pay your employees the minimum amount that you can, and you don't give them any perks and you don't give them any benefits, and you're constantly trying to maximize your own situation. That's what old me would have done. That's what 18-year-old me would do when I'm trying to scrounge nickels together to pay for a semester at college. Now, fast forward to 10 years later, where I'm running my own company and I'm reading books by Brene Brown, and I'm reading books like one of the most impactful books that I ever read is a book called Go Giver. And what that book is about is it talks about you will really only reach your most limitless potential when every person around you feels like you are willing to give benefit from yourself to them. And so this is where I come back to for trying to provide a better return than the index funds to my clients. This comes back to me personally guaranteeing the return. This comes back to me telling Andrew that if he couldn't take a deal down solo, that I would jump out of a car to be able to make a call on quickly making a decision on a property, because I wanted people to take me seriously. And one of the things that I learned is that if you try to conserve all deal flow, if you try to conserve all your whole network, if you try to hoard your contractors, if you try to hoard deal flow, if you try to hoard your lending connections, if you try to keep all of this information to yourself and you want to buy properties by yourself, every month that goes by in which you're stockpiling money away into a bucket, that is money that is not going to work for you. That money is sitting idle. And the thing is that you can't deploy it until you got 20% down. That's going to take you a long freaking time.
Oh, yeah. Takes a while.
And so now what ends up happening in that situation is you're squandering so many could-be opportunities. And where those opportunities come from is they come from you having a network of people that are bringing deal flow, that are hooking you up with their lenders, that are hooking you up with their friends who are investors like me. That's the group of people that you need to surround yourself by so that you can flow through deals and you can get equity staked in as many freaking properties as you can. And I can't even begin to tell you at this point where we are at economically in 2023 with rates pushing 7%. The number one prerogative that any person who is interested in real estate, their number one prerogative that they should have right now is how can I get as many properties under contract that cash flow today as possible. And the reason being is that we are not going to be seeing rates at 7% forever. There is going to be a time in which rates are at 5% and rates are at 4%. And the simple correlated equation that is interest rates and housing prices is indisputable. So what it comes down to is if anything that you are buying right now that cash flows 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%, these deals are not good deals. They are home runs. Because what's going to happen when you can go back, refinance a property at 4%, that property is not going to be worth what you bought it for at the time in which it was 7%, that property is going to be worth $100,000 more here in Massachusetts. And now think about if you got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 properties under contract that you secured with rates at 6, 7% that makes sense. If they make sense at 6 or 7%, what do you think how much sense do they make at 4%?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to look at it. And I don't know how you're doing this, but I have these questions lined up and you are answering them before I even ask them. That's why I haven't been asking a lot of questions, is because you are literally dot for dot answering every single question I have. So for people listening, if you think I'm just letting him speak, it's because he's just hitting the nail on the head before. I think he's in my mind. So I don't even get it. I was literally about to ask you, what do you think about the market? And you immediately just went off about the market. So I think you're just reading my mind.
I'm happy.
It's amazing.
To keep going. I'm happy to keep going, man. The way that I look at it with the market is there could not be a better time to buy real estate than right now. What is literally happening is they are putting a hard stop, a hard ceiling on all prices. They are saying to you, hey, we want to keep prices down so that we can make your money more. You can make better use of your money to be able to acquire more properties. They're literally baiting you, saying buy more properties while your money can go farther. And now we're in this position where when you've taken the time to build over the past couple of years your network of people that want to do deals with you, and you're performing and you continue performing, particularly in an environment in which rates are at 6 or 7%. I don't know about you, but what's it look like in the stock market these days? It's a freaking death. It's a freaking combat zone in there, man. So the way that I look at it is if you got the combat zone that is the stock market right now, and you can take this money from your clients that's underperforming, and you can say, look, I'm going to guarantee you a return and we're going to move forward and do these deals. Now you're snatching up equity left and right. Now, if you can buy value add properties, you buy a value add property, you can add money and equity based off the performance of the property because it's a commercial property that refinances based off the performance. If you have a commercial property north of 5 units, the property is going to be refinanced based off the rent roll more than it is the comp values of other property. This is really, again, one of the reasons why it's so important to network. If you don't network, you're taking down 2 units. You can't manage 6 units by yourself. You can't manage 10 units by yourself unless you're experienced. Now, even with you being experienced, can you afford to take down a 6 unit, an 8 unit, a 10 unit by yourself? The answer is no. So now if you can get into these properties, it's going to make it a heck of a lot easier for you to get in, do your value add component, refinance the property, and then get your money to your investors back out and get money for yourself and your partners. And I think that when we look at it that way, let's now bake in not only that value add component, but also bake in the fact that rates are going to come down from that 7% marker back down to a normal threshold at some point in the next 5 years or so. Now we're talking about really making some money. And now at that point, I take that Grant Cardone mindset and 10x that bitch.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that people miss right now because they think about the now, right? Now. They're like, oh no, the rates are so high. Why would I buy in? But as long as the properties, like think about it, now is yes, it's one of the hardest markets to buy in and make numbers work. But if you find those properties that the numbers do work, like they work, right? Even if it's like 7% return, 8% return, whatever. If they work now and then they have a potential to get up to like 10% just through like a year of stabilization, that's going to be even better later down the road when you refinance because the rate's already as high as they can probably go and they're only trending down, hopefully. I mean, let's see what administration does. But in the next 5 years, I would say a healthy market is between like 4 to 6%. 6 plus, 7 plus, that's not really healthy for our economy. So that's like icing on the cake. You get a property that's stabilized right now, like 10%. Like when the rates go down, it's going to be cash flowing like 15% and immediately adds equity. Because when rates go down, people will pay more for the property because the cap rate like bounces out to like where they're making the returns they want to make. So something that is $500,000 now, that's like cash flowing 10%. When the rates go down and it's cash flowing like 15% now, and you refinance into like 5%, or you go to sell it, like that property might be worth like $650. So $150,000 from you just waiting for the rates to go down. which is
exactly. And then so the way that I look at that is like it's the analogy: rising tide lifts all boats, right? It's essentially the way that I look at it is when we get interest rates to go back down to 4 or 5% from not being at this 7% number anymore, we're going to be in a position where every property that we have purchased over the last 3 years or so, you're going to be making out like a bandit, and you're going to be refinancing all those properties, pulling out a shitload of equity, and then you're going to be able to roll that equity into future deals to be able to grow your portfolio. And it's just going to further amplify this whole process. Now what you've really done is you've really pushed that snowball down the hill and really just built a freaking full-blown avalanche.
Yep, because they do say the first couple of deals are the hardest, and then once you get going, and then when you finally hit that market trend, because it always does this, it's always going like this, but it's heading up, but it's always going like this. So when you hit that market trend with your first like couple units that you have or whatever, and you can actually sell, then deploy them into other bigger units and repeat the process, like it's a beautiful thing. And you're heading the way that you're gonna just hit the ground running. Like you're already a train that's chugging along, but like when that market hits that sweet spot where you can take the equity out and start firing away again, you're gonna be a jet. Flying around like a jet. And if people just think like that, you think like the future, think analytically about like the market, and look at the history of real estate, like what it's done. History tends to not repeat itself, but it's pretty damn similar. And just preparing for that and buying with that in mind is going to set you up for more success. And you're doing that, which is awesome. And even just saying that out loud like gets me pumped. I need to go buy a deal right now somehow.
No, I mean, I get to the end of my day today, and I have 2 people that hit me up with off-market deals while I was at work today, and it's just like, this is what I'm talking about, man. Where it's like you got people who are working off the book, off the hours for you, trying to deal source for you, because the way people are bringing me deals now, because they're saying you got access to capital, and I know if I bring you a deal, then you're willing to get it done. And so whether they're gonna wholesale it to me, whether they're gonna get a finder's fee for something they can't take down, Andrew and our team involved with over that property as a team, and then again, it's like kind of the direction that we're looking to go. And tested to earlier, it's really just about getting that momentum going to be able to put yourself in a position where you can just really scale. And the biggest at this point is just a girlfriend that I was telling you about that's now actually my wife.
Biggest detriment?
Oh, no. I'm saying the biggest detriment is trying to fend off a wife from wanting to buy a single family. You know what I mean? It's like,
oh yeah,
it's like tough to scale anchor around your ball and chain.
It's all about family, so you got to compensate because she's part of the team. She's helping you do everything.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's just all I want is to create ideal life, people that we love and that we're close with, and be a lot of friends you make along the way. And there's going to be a lot of people in your network you never knew before that are going to be instrumental people in your life, and have built this all up together. And it's going to be so that this work and all this effort today is just for you to be able to enjoy your time that you have here on earth, people that you genuinely care about.
I mean, the whole meaning of life is love and positivity, and you want to do with your family. And this is just real estate, and real estate is just an avenue to get to that. And it's an awesome avenue, and people should learn about it and not be afraid of it. I think your story will really some eyes to people, opens people's eyes about like do within real estate in such a short period of time too. To wrap this up, because we've been for over an hour, anything else you want to just tell the audience, social media handles that they can talk to you on, meetups that you run or attend, charity events, any business links that you have, you could talk a little bit about your gym, where to find and contact you if they ever want to reach out to you.
I think the best way to reach out to me is probably on Instagram. Instagram handle is 1099 mindset, at the 1099 set.
Yeah, and I'll put that. I'll put that in the description as well of the YouTube and the podcast and stuff too. I mean, if you guys are in Massachusetts as well, where's your gym at?
My gym is located in Newton and Needham. It's right outside Boston. So if you guys are staying in and around the city, to get a lift in and out shoot the shit, talk real estate, or come down and toss around some barbells, it's a great time. And this and real estate are 2 things that I think could push you to just be better people, live a better life, better, higher quality life. I think that better way to.
I mean, honestly, I'm a huge proponent of fitness as well, similar in some ways, because I studied kinesiology in college, looking to be a therapist or a physician assistant, and I also those athletic training courses. What do they call them? The NAXM. The NAA to take that stuff. I mean, I was looking into doing that, but he didn't go down that route fully. I mean, it all comes down to like self-healthy. God, every day you focus on yourself, build your mindset. It builds the base for you to be successful. As long as you're getting after it every day, be a day that you don't move or exercise. It's an off day. You should be doing something to just get you moving. Just it helps your mind, helps your body, and it helps you just be more successful in any endeavor that you go on. I'm a true believer of that for real.
Absolutely. People that I close with in my network work capacity or another, they really hold themselves accountable in that realm. And I think I just think that for you to reach your full potential, that be up at 5 a.m. to start getting after it, or whether that be work until 8 or 9 p.m. getting after it, you got to have your mind right. You got to be healthy. You got to not get sick. You got to be able to go 365, meaning you don't have time off for your friends or your family. What it does mean is that you have the ability to go at your speed, lane that you want without setbacks. And I think that in order to do that, you got to take health seriously.
And the point of working so hard, can't live long.
Absolutely.
What's the point of working so hard if you're going to be in the hospital at 55 with like knee problems or hip problems and can't even move or enjoy life? There's no reason. So health is number one, and then they say health is wealth. So wealth, baby.
It's wealth.
Hey, thank you so much, Zach, for coming on. We'll cut it there. I'm sure I'll have you back on in like a year or so, like abnormal amount of more stories. That will be just great. See where you're at then. But appreciate you coming on and spending the time. You're definitely a busy guy with your gym and everything, and that you gave a lot of insight on. I love this one.
Man, I can't wait. I appreciate you taking the time out to chat, shop, and to be on this guest with you, and you for the opportunity. And I look forward to again in the future, sharing some more to help inspire other people.
Yeah, get it, brother.